Welcome to Darkwatch Stories, where we bring to life the chills, the shadows, and the mysteries that linger in the dark. If you enjoy spine-tingling stories and want to support the journey into the unknown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Now, sit back, dim the lights, and let's step into tonight's story. Killing a monster isn't simple. Movies lie and say one silver bullet or perfect swing ends it, but real monsters don't care about clean endings. They come back again and again until you're too tired to lift a weapon or too numb to be afraid. By the time you finally understand what you're truly facing, it's usually already too late. Sheriff George Lost knew that. So did his oldest friend David Winters as they sat together above Main Street. From the small office window, Daggerlin looked calm, porch lights flickering along Lake Erie like nothing was wrong. But George and David saw ghosts in every street. Samantha Granger's footprints had ended at the bluff. Josh Maddox had almost died in the water. The Harpers lost everything but their kids, and Marcus Wilkins nearly bled out on Lake Road. Frank Greeley's burning trawler still haunted them. Something in the lake had claimed the town, and time was slipping away. The desk between them looked less like a sheriff's workspace and more like a conspiracy theorist bunker. Books leaned in, uneven stacks, waterlogged library volumes, rare orders from shady websites, pages smudged by thumbs that didn't want to be remembered. George had stopped caring what was respectable. Folklore, legends, cryptids, if it mentioned anything that crawled up from dark water, he wanted it. David stared at the mess and thought this is what desperation actually looks like. They dug through bestiaries and pulp novels with ridiculous covers, lake monster sketches printed beside screaming victims. Some experts swore monsters feared silver, others insisted silver was useless. Fire, iron, salt, prayer, half the advice canceled the rest. Yet every story shared the same heartbeat, something lurking beneath patient and hungry. George didn't care whether it came from science or superstition. If there was even one chance to hurt the thing in the lake, he'd use it. The coffee in their mugs had gone cold, but the pot kept hissing like it refused to give up. George flipped through a cracked encyclopedia of aquatic horrors while David scribbled on a legal pad, circling anything that sounded remotely like their creature. The office felt more like a college dorm before finals than a law enforcement hub, two exhausted men cramming for an exam whose only grade was who lived or died by morning. David rubbed his temples, frustration simmering beneath his fatigue. Every paragraph seemed to contradict the last. Monsters that hated silver. Monsters that ignored it, some that burned in fire, others that swam through lava in old myths. There's no starting point, he muttered. Nothing solid. George didn't look up. Then we make one, he said. We test everything. Silver, salt, fire, iron, whatever we can carry onto a boat. Logic and evidence were luxuries Daggerlin couldn't afford. Spread across the desk, the books painted centuries of waterborne nightmares. People had seen things in rivers, lakes, and harbors long before anyone invented cameras. There were stories of river demons pulling children from muddy banks, fishermen who vanished, leaving nets still coiled, dark shapes bumping against wooden hulls at night. George traced a finger along an inked drawing. Different languages, same old fear. Whatever haunted Daggerlin felt less like a new problem and more like an old curse. One passage David found made his stomach twist. A creature that preferred the liver, leaving the rest of the body strangely intact. Predators, the writer claimed, sometimes chose the richest organ, dense with nutrients and iron. David read it aloud, voice flat, and both men thought of what they'd already seen on the shore. The details fit too well to ignore. George's jaw tightened. Monsters in stories, and monsters in Daggerlin were starting to look like the same thing. Another book, one George barely remembered ordering, talked about legends from far away. There were drawings of creatures with webbed fingers, jagged teeth, eyes too wide for human faces. A Philippine story mentioned the shokoi, a half-human, half-fish thing that dragged swimmers under from the shallows. David tapped the page thoughtfully. Different countries, different names, same pattern, something in fresh water that considered people prey. It was almost comforting to know Daggerlin wasn't the first place cursed like this. They kept circling the same handful of words, silver saltfire. Some stories treated them like magic keys, others like useless superstition. But repeatedly salt and silver appeared side by side, sometimes whispered as cleansing metals, sometimes as tools used by desperate villagers. David snapped one book, closed frustration boiling over. "Every tale ends the same way," he said softly. "Blood, grief, and the things still out there." George stared at the pages and decided their ending had to be different. David flipped through another dog-eared paperback, this one written like a survival manual for people unlucky enough to meet the impossible. A short paragraph caught his eye. Some freshwater demons could not survive in the ocean. Salt water burned and weakened them. "Maybe that's it," he murmured. "Not just that it haunts our lake, maybe it's trapped here." George leaned over the passage, feeling a thread of hope tug in his chest for the first time in days. George grabbed a different volume, remembering a line he'd skimmed and dismissed earlier. There it was. A creature that targeted liver, recoiled from salt, and showed heightened sensitivity to silver. Reading it now after everything else felt like finding two halves of the same map. The room went quiet. David leaned back, staring at the ceiling. "Salt and silver," he said slowly. "We might finally have something that isn't just a ghost story." It wasn't proof, but it felt close. George immediately thought logistics. Salt he could get in bulk. Every hardware store and farm supply outlet kept pallets of the stuff. But silver wasn't exactly lying around in weapon form. David's mind went straight to the one man who might make it work. Marcus Wilkins, the town mechanic who'd nearly died saving kids on Lake Road. Marcus's shop was cluttered with more than tools, old kilns, scraps of metal, forgotten projects, half between welding and art. George doubted a man who patched tractors could suddenly become a monster slayer's armorer, but David wasn't so unsure. "Metal is metal," he argued. "He shapes steel every day. Heat hammer grind, same principles. If we bring him silver, he can turn it into blades or spikes." George looked again at the battered books. In a town with dwindling options, a stubborn mechanic with a makeshift forge suddenly sounded like their best chance at hurting something no bullet could stop. David leaned over the table, tapping a hastily scribbled plan. Silver for weapons, salt for defense. Boats lined and loaded not with just flares and radios, but with bags of what everyone else used on icy sidewalks. "We don't just carry it," he said. "We throw it, spread it, choke the thing in it." George nodded slowly. Grocery store salt against ancient horror sounded ridiculous, but so did monsters until you watched them grin over broken bodies. George pushed himself up from the desk, feeling years in his knees. "We'll need more than a couple bags," he said. "Pallets, barrels. The town budget could scream later. For now they needed something that gave their people a chance in the dark." Outside wind pressed against old glass waves, whispering against the shore. The lake sounded almost gentle from here, which only made George trust it less. Calm water had already hidden too many ugly truths from them. Decision made. George grabbed his coat and checked the duty roster. Only Mendez and Hawkins remained with him. Watterson had driven off the day before, fleeing to family in Columbus and away from whatever hunted their shoreline. David didn't blame him. Cowardice and survival looked almost identical depending on the angle. "We'll tell them what we've got," George said. "Guesswork's better than pretending nothing's wrong." In Daggerlin, denial had already become just another way to die. David's voice softened as he spoke about Owen. He'd been gone more than he was home lately. caught between the town's fear and his son's quiet needs. He'd thought about sending the boy away farther inland, safer on paper, but the idea felt wrong. Owen wanted to stay trusted, Joe and Crichton the dog like extra armor. Distant relatives and unfamiliar towns couldn't replace a father's presence, no matter how battered that father's life had become. Leaving would break something important. George reminded David that Owen was a good kid, sharper than he realized. The boy idolized George, convinced he'd grow up to wear a badge and ride a boat alongside him one day. David found it both touching and terrifying. Being a cop in Daggerlin currently meant staking your life between a monster and the people who barely believed it existed. Still, hearing George speak kindly about his son eased something in David's chest he hadn't noticed tightening. George's voice dropped as he told David what he already knew but rarely heard. "Your son loves you." It landed heavier than any monster story. For all the chaos and missed dinners, Owen never looked at his father like a failure. David nodded, swallowing emotions he'd pushed aside since Claire's funeral. Before he could answer, the moment passed. Their work wasn't finished. The lake wouldn't wait. And somewhere out there, another family still believed today would be ordinary. Miles away at Edgewater Marina, Mark Hanlon moved with practiced precision. He checked lines, opened hatches, sniffed for fuel leaks, and watched gauges like they were church icons. Ellen teased him for running the same safety routine twice, but Mark just smiled and said habits kept people alive. Their son Ryan traced their route along a folded chart, naming coastal towns like stepping stones: Euclid Mentor, Daggerlin, Ashtabula. For the Hanlons, the lake was still just a scenic backdrop. Ellen called Ryan their little tour guide, his careful pronunciation drawing a laugh from both parents. The boat slid out of the marina city skyline, fading into haze behind them. Mark relaxed into the rhythm of the water, trusting the forecast and his experience. A calm day, light winds, solid equipment on paper, nothing could go wrong. None of them knew that the same shoreline Ryan traced with his finger would soon be marked by blood and missing deputies. Back in the hospital, Marcus looked like someone held together by stitches and stubbornness. Bruises, bandages, machines, and that thin line of beeping that meant he was still in the fight. When George and David entered, he forced himself upright with a curse-refusing pity. "I'm not dead," he rasped. David sat close, forearms on his knees, while George stayed standing, hat tucked in hand. They weren't here to offer flowers. They were here to ask for help. George explained the folklore. They'd combed through the patterns around salt and silver, the desperate hint of weakness they might finally exploit. Marcus listened, without interrupting, eyes narrowed. "Salt and silver," he repeated, rolling the words like old stories he'd heard as a kid. His grandfather had muttered similar things on bad weather nights, back when Marcus thought they were just superstitions. Now those tales felt like warnings they'd been too modern to believe. Marcus's voice steadied as he laid it out: salt to burn and blind silver to cut deep enough to matter. The creature's hide wouldn't give easily, but shaped metal, driven hard, might pierce it. He couldn't swing a blade on the water anymore, not after his injuries, but he could still make something lethal. "Bring me the metal," he said. "I'll take care of the rest." For him, returning to the shop felt like another kind of battlefield. George met his gaze and nodded. In that moment, their roles shifted. Marcus was no longer just a victim, but a weaponsmith in an unseen war. They left him to rest, promises hanging in the sterile air. Outside the hospital, the night smelled of impending rain. George headed back to the station to brief his remaining deputies. David turned toward home, heart split between his duty to the town and the boy waiting in their yard with a frisbee. Owen's shout and Crichton's bark met David before he'd even killed the engine. For a few precious minutes, the world shrank to a patch of grass, a neon disc, and a dog who believed catching it was the most important job on Earth. David threw and laughed until his lungs burned, letting himself pretend the lake was just scenery again. In that brief window, father and son existed outside the shadow of what moved beneath the waves. They collapsed onto the grass, Crichton panting happily against their legs. David used the quiet to say things he'd avoided since Claire's death. He stumbled through an apology for being gone, so much for drifting through his grief like a ghost. Owen listened, breathing hard, then simply nodded. "I know you love me," he said, like it was the most obvious fact in the world. The words hit David harder than any accusation ever could have. David hugged his son tight, then tried to lighten the mood by teasing him about being sweaty. The familiar banter returned like muscle memory. When Owen's next throw sent the frisbee slicing straight and true, David whistled in approval. For a moment, the future didn't look like a monster-haunted shoreline. It looked like Owen growing up Crichton at his side, maybe even days when sheriff and widower weren't the only words that defined David's life. Evening crept in, as they played sky slowly dimming instead of snapping instantaneously to horror. That was the problem with the lake. David thought it always eased into darkness so gently that people forgot what darkness could hide. Somewhere between throws, his mind drifted back to George, to Marcus, to pallets of salt and chunks of silver. He shoved the thoughts away. For now, there was just a boy, a dog, and the thin illusion of normal. Back at the sheriff's office, the quiet felt heavier than usual. Only one lamp burned on George's desk, casting long shadows over the clutter of books. The radio crackled to life, Clara Hensley's familiar voice cutting through the stillness. She relayed a Coast Guard call, a family from Cleveland Engine dead 5 miles west of Palmer's Bluff, drifting in the current. George straightened, already picturing the boat rocking helplessly, as the lake pulled it closer to danger. "Any injuries?" he asked, hoping for good news he didn't trust. Clara reported none, only panic and anchor failing to catch bottom. George thought of Ryan tracing coastal towns on a chart and felt his jaw tighten. Mendez chimed in from the field. She and Hawkins were minutes from the marina and eager to respond. George ordered them to wait. He didn't want them going near that stretch alone, but time and water rarely listened to sensible commands. Mendez pushed back gently, but firmly. By the time George could get there, she argued the family might be dashed against rocks. They had weapons, flares, radios. They weren't helpless. More importantly, they were deputies trained to move toward trouble, not watch it from shore. Every word echoed lessons George had drilled into them. Hearing his own principles turned back on him hurt almost as much as the fear of what might be waiting in that fog. George stared at his reflection in the office window, seeing exhaustion and guilt in equal measure. Samantha, the Harpers, Marcus, the lake, had already taken too much from his watch. Denying help to a stranded family felt like inviting another tragedy. Finally, he relented. Mendez and Hawkins could launch, but they had to keep constant contact. He grabbed his keys, a shotgun, even a half-empty salt shaker, and headed out cursing how unprepared they still were. The marina's gravel lot crunched under George's tires. Rain had passed, leaving the air damp and metallic, the kind of night that carried sound too far and not far enough. David's truck was already there. A torn bag of winter road salt slung over his shoulder as he approached the patrol boat. "It's all I could grab fast," he said, tossing it aboard. Emergency improvisation had become their specialty, whether they liked it or not. George tried raising Mendez on the radio. Only static answered. Concern hardened into dread as he called again, voice tightening. "Too long," he muttered, when the silence held. On the dock, he told David he didn't have to come, that he didn't want to risk him too. David shut that down immediately. "You're not going alone," he said, tone sharp. Out there were a family, 2 deputies and a monster, that didn't care about procedure. George hesitated, fear for his friend, warring with the knowledge that he couldn't handle boat weapons, and wounded all by himself if things went wrong. David didn't budge. They'd stared down the lake together as kids. They'd faced this as men. Finally, George stepped back and let David take the wheel. Engines rumbled to life. The patrol boat slid from the slip bow, turning toward the black horizon. The salt bag braced like some makeshift holy relic. As the town lights shrank behind them, George remembered sneaking out with David and Joe's old skiff, daring each other to go farther from shore. Back then, the worst they feared was a scolding. Now the same water held screaming families and grinning nightmares. The patrol boat cut through the dark bow, light sweeping eerie paths across low waves. Neither man spoke. There was nothing left to say that the lake hadn't already heard 100 times. A pale shadow rose ahead. The Hanlon's cruiser drifting broadside, running lights still glowing. Fog had rolled in, patchy and thick, turning the boat into a ghost half-formed. Beside, it bobbed the county patrol skiff, tied clumsily to the rail, floodlights still burning toward nothing. The sight hit George like a punch. He didn't need anyone to spell it out. Deputies didn't leave boats floating like that, unless something had gone very wrong very fast. David eased the throttles back, bringing their boat alongside with slow, careful nudges. Hulls bumped and settled, ropes creaking softly. No silhouettes moved against the lights, no voices called for help, no flash of a flare cut the fog. A child's life jacket lay abandoned near the stern, like a dropped toy. The night felt too quiet, not peaceful, but smothered, as if the fog itself were listening, waiting to see who would speak first. George's voice dropped to a near whisper as he noted the obvious no sign of Mendez Hawkins or the Hanlons. They stood still for a moment, letting their ears adjust, hoping for any hint of life. All they heard were ropes straining and the soft slap of water. The silence wasn't empty. It felt heavy, as if it knew exactly what lay hidden and was determined not to share unless forced. David's fingers tightened around the salt bag. They tied off the patrol boat to the skiff, bringing the 3 hulls into uneasy contact. George chambered around with a loud, deliberate click that seemed to startle even the fog. He ordered David to board first while he covered with a shotgun. David stepped across boots, thudding onto fiberglass that groaned under his weight. Their world shrank to the small patch of deck, lit by his flashlight and the dull glow of the distant floodlight. Fog coiled along the deck, carrying faint smells, brine fuel, and something sharper that raised the hair on David's neck. He swept the flashlight, slowly revealing overturned coolers, a damp towel, the abandoned life jacket. Everything looked ordinary until it didn't. Dark streaks marred, the non-slip surface thin at first, then thicker dragged through tread, blood drying in sticky lines. David called George over, his voice tight. This wasn't a peaceful engine failure anymore. George confirmed what they already knew. The issued sidearm on the deck belonged to Mendez. He lifted it carefully, grip smeared red. The knowledge settled between them like extra weight. The fog pressed closer, blurring the railings and swallowing the lake just beyond arm's reach. It felt like standing in the eye of a storm made of water and fear. Then a heavy splash sounded nearby, too solid for a fish, too intentional for a random wave. David swung the beam toward the sound, catching only ripples spreading into darkness. George raised the shotgun, tracking the empty water. "That wasn't a fish," he said quietly. Another dull knock answered, this time from beneath their feet, as if something large brushed the hull from below. The boat vibrated with it, a shudder that traveled right up through their bones. Something was out there, close testing the edges of their courage and their hull. They moved toward the cabin hatch together, George covering while David descended. The air below hit him like a wall, thick, metallic, foul. His flashlight beam found the floor, first smeared red, pooled in grooves, then shapes in the shadows, limbs at wrong angles, torn clothing, a nightmare rendered in cramped quarters. David's boot slipped, almost sending him skidding through the blood. George hauled him back up, both men knowing they'd seen enough to understand the fate below. Back on deck, fog wrapped them in a smaller, tighter world. Instinct turned them back to back, shotgun and pistol, raised eyes, scanning the shifting gray. The lake, the sky, the horizon, everything beyond the deck vanished into a uniform, suffocating mist. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then the hull shuddered again. Harder this time, as if something heavier than a man leaned against it from the outside, testing how much force it would take to crack fiberglass. Knocks came again, sliding from below to the rail, deliberate and heavy. The boat felt like a drum under an unseen hand. David swept the beam in wide arcs, catching only fragments, wet rail, swirling fog, the ghost of a wake. Every instinct screamed to fire blindly, but he held back. If he missed, they'd waste ammo and maybe never see a second chance. Then the thing finally stepped where they could see it. It exploded from the fog, shape too tall and wrong to be human, shoulders slick and gleaming, claws catching the light. George fired instinctively, the shotgun blast dwarfing every other sound. The shot staggered it, but didn't stop the charge. Impact threw both men across the deck bodies, slamming into the rail. The shotgun skittered away. David's flashlight rolled its beam, spinning wild patterns through the mist, turning the creature into something that flickered between silhouette and nightmare. For a heartbeat, the fog thinned, and they saw it clearly hunched, grinning claws, scratching lazy grooves into the deck as if it had all the time in the world. George fought to his feet, eyes locked on where the shotgun had landed. David scrambled for his own weapon, finding only slick fiberglass and spreading blood. The boat rocked under the creature's shifting weight ropes, groaning as if even the lake didn't want it standing there. George lunged for the shotgun fingers inches from the stock when pain exploded through his arm. A claw tore across his elbow, nearly severing the limb. Time stuttered. He stared at the mangled flesh mind, struggling to accept what he was seeing. Then the creature slammed him down, claws pressing into his chest. It tapped once, deliberately over his liver, like it was choosing its cut. Terror finally broke through his shock, but his body refused to respond. Nearby, the burst salt bag spilled across the deck like someone had dropped snow in a storm. David's hand closed on the grains, their sharp edges biting his skin. He threw a fistful into the creature's face. Not sure it would matter, praying it would. The monster's reaction was immediate and violent, a shriek, steam rising from its burned skin, claws scraping wildly at its own eyes. For the first time, it looked genuinely hurt and surprised. David threw another handful, then another, driving the creature backward. Each scatter of salt brought more hissing steam, more frantic thrashing. The beast retreated step by, unwilling, step stubborn, even in pain. David's boot struck something solid, his pistol. He grabbed it, leveled it with both hands, and fired. This time, the shots landed hard, dark fluid sprang as the creature staggered. Still, it clung to the deck rage, keeping it upright when flesh should have failed. George, dripping blood and swaying, wrestled the shotgun into the crook of his remaining good arm. He braced, forcing muscles that wanted to collapse to obey one more order. The blast at close range tore through the creature's chest. It groaned low, guttural, almost confused, then toppled backward over the rail. The lake swallowed it without ceremony. Ripples spread outward, vanishing into the fog, as if nothing extraordinary had happened at all. The victory felt thin. George slumped, shotgun slipping from his grasp. Blood ran freely from what was left of his arm, his face the color of paper. David dropped beside him, hand pressed to his chest, until he felt the faint rise and fall, breathing but barely. Panic flared, but he forced himself to move. He ripped off his belt, looped it high above the wound, and cinched it until George groaned. The flow slowed, but not enough. Desperation sharpened his focus. David spotted a broken railing post, shoved it through the belt, and twisted. The improvised tourniquet tightened cruelly. drawing another weak sound from George's throat, but the bleeding finally eased to an ooze. There was no time to baby him. David hooked his arms under his friend's good shoulder and dragged him toward the patrol boat, boots sliding through blood and salt. Each step felt heavier, but quitting was never an option. He hauled George over the rail and laid him flat on the patrol boat's deck, chest still rising shallowly. A small sound cut through the night, then cries muffled but unmistakable. David froze. Voices were coming from below deck on the Hanlon's cruiser. He could hear a woman sobbing, a child whimpering, and a man trying to sound brave. The family was still alive. The horror below hadn't claimed everyone yet. David stumbled back to the cruiser, forced the hatch open again, and swept his flashlight inside. 3 faces blinked up at him from the dark. The father stood in front, clutching a tiny pocket knife that shook in his hand. Behind him, Ellen wrapped herself around Ryan, both trembling, eyes wide. All of them were splattered with someone else's blood. When David said he was there to get them out, the knife slipped from the man's fingers like a discarded illusion. He got the boy out first, hands steady, despite the adrenaline pounding through him. Then Ellen, then Mark, each one scrambling gratefully onto the patrol boat. They saw George's condition and went silent, understanding instantly that survival had come with a cost. David climbed last, shoved the throttles forward, and pointed them toward Daggerlin's faint shorelights. Behind them, the Hanlon's cruiser drifted like a ghost, carrying blood and empty space where deputies should have been. They reached the marina to a blaze of red strobes. 2 ambulances waited, crews already moving before the boat even finished bumping against the fenders. Paramedics swarmed George, checking the tourniquet with quick hands. Pulse weak, massive blood loss, one called out. But his tone held determination, not surrender. As they rolled George away, David forced the question out how bad. The medic didn't sugarcoat it. They'd do everything they could. Beyond that, it was in fate's hands. The second ambulance took the Hanlons, wrapping them in blankets and calm words. Minor injuries, the crew said, but David knew the real wounds would appear later in nightmares and sudden flinches. Within minutes, both ambulances were gone, sirens shrinking into the fog. The marina fell quiet again, as if nothing had happened. That was the worst part. The lake always reset the stage, leaving only those who remembered to dig through the wreckage of memory. Headlights cut across the lot, and a battered pickup rolled to a stop. Joe Winters climbed out stiffly, the years settling in his shoulders. Crichton burst from the passenger side, nails clattering on the planks as he ran straight to David. The dog pressed against his ribs, tail wagging once before, going still nose tasting the air around the blood-scented boat. David dropped to his knees, fingers twisting in the shepherd's fur like an anchor. Joe asked what happened, voice gruff but concerned. David's answer came in fragments, shaken and raw. A family trapped deputies, missing George barely alive. If we'd been a minute later. He started, then stopped rubbing his face. Joe frowned, picking up on everything David wasn't saying. This wasn't just an engine failure or a simple rescue call. The pieces didn't fit any normal picture, and Joe had known his son long enough to recognize that tone. David told him the truth, or as much as anyone could bear. It wasn't just bad luck. The creature had attacked again. Joe stiffened instinctively, pushing back. David's conviction sounded too much like the same certainty he'd shown when Claire got sick, when he'd supported her decision to refuse chemo. Old wounds tore open. Joe accused him of giving up too easily back then, of letting her die without fighting hard enough. The words hit like punches. David snapped, insisting Claire's choice had been her own. She'd refused to spend her remaining time locked to machines poisoned in the name of hope. He loved her enough to stand by that decision, even when it shattered him. Joe argued that Owen needed his mother, that David should have pushed harder. The doc suddenly held not just tonight's blood, but months of unspoken grief and guilt, all boiling over in one bitter, ugly argument. This was the first time they'd said Claire's name aloud since burying her, and it felt like tearing open a sealed wound. Crichton's low growl rumbled beneath their words, claws scraping the planks as he paced between them and the water. Neither man noticed. Joe accused David of chasing monsters instead of being the father Owen deserved. David, frayed and exhausted, took the words like proof of every doubt he already carried. The fog thickened around them, listening. The dog's growls grew sharper as the tension escalated. David, too tangled in argument to read the warning, snapped a command. "Sit." Crichton obeyed, but his body stayed coiled, ears pinned forward, eyes locked on the black water under the dock. "Stay," David ordered, needing control somewhere, anywhere. The shepherd stayed, muscles trembling, eyes never leaving the lake. There was something down there, close enough for instinct to feel, even if human eyes couldn't see it yet. David turned back to his father, anger burning away his restraint. He refused to accept being called a failure as a parent, on top of everything else. The argument spiraled, both men circling old pains while the night around them shifted. The fog pressed in closer, swallowing the edges of the dock, the shoreline, the world beyond their fight. Crichton's growl finally snapped, sharp, urgent, dragging their attention down to the dark gap between the pilings. The shepherd stared at the water teeth, bared every line of his body, screaming alarm. David barely began to look when something black and cold shot upward, a clawed hand that locked around his ankle. There was no dramatic pause, no chance to react. One savage yank ripped his legs from under him. He hit the boards hard, hands scrambling for a grip, but his lower body was already in the lake's grip, being dragged into the dark. Joe lunged, grabbing his son's wrist with both hands, planting his feet against the edge of the dock. For a heartbeat father, and monster played tug-of-war with David's life. He saw his father's face above him, lined desperate, eyes wide with terror and regret, and then he was gone. The lake tore him from Joe's grasp and swallowed him whole. The water closed over his head like a door slamming shut. The monster didn't need a second chance this time. What happened next would be debated in Daggerlin for years, but one fact remained brutal and clear. In a handful of days, the town had lost Samantha nearly, lost the Harpers, nearly lost Marcus, and now might lose both George and David. The sheriff lay in a hospital, fighting for his life. A deputy was missing on the water. Another had vanished below the dock. The creature in the lake had turned a quiet town into a graveyard in waiting. By the time word spread, fear outran any official statement. People who'd rolled their eyes at rumors now stared at the lake like it was a loaded gun aimed at their front doors. Fishermen canceled trips. Parents dragged kids away from the shoreline. The docks emptied except for a few stubborn souls and one black shepherd pacing restlessly, whining at water that gave nothing back. Whatever lived beneath the surface had finally proved it wasn't just a story. There was no cavalry coming, no federal task force on the horizon. Most of Daggerlin's law enforcement was dead, missing, or bleeding out under hospital lights. The monster had deliberately broken their shield first. Those who remained, dispatchers part-time, deputies, aging volunteers, weren't equipped for this kind of war. Calls flooded in anyway, strange splashes, shadows near docks, boats, drifting unmanned. Every ring of the phone sounded like another person learning fear too late. The town's leaders, once so sure of budgets and bylaws, could now only offer sharp-edged honesty. They knew too little and had lost too much. Slick press conferences wouldn't help when something could claw you off a dock in silence. Instead, a single message went out, simple and brutal. They couldn't protect everyone anymore. If the lake wanted blood, it would find less resistance than ever. Survival, at least for now, would depend on each person's choices. So the warning spread through radios, phones, shouted conversations across yards. If you can leave Daggerlin, do it now. Pack fast, don't argue, drive inland until Lake Erie becomes a rumor in your rearview mirror. If you can't because of money, family, stubborn roots, then lock your doors, arm yourself with whatever you've got, and stay away from the water. This wasn't about superstition anymore. It was about avoiding a predator you'd finally been forced to see clearly. In the end, the message became brutally direct. There is something in the lake. It has taken children, parents, officers, and friends. It does not fear prayer, denial, or half-hearted plans. All law enforcement able to fight it is gone or broken. As of tonight, no badge stands between you and the dark. If you hear the waves calling, don't answer. If you see something in the water, turn away. The monster is real and it isn't finished. All law enforcement in Daggerlin is either dead, missing, or fighting for their life in a hospital bed. The uniforms once meant safety. Now they're reminders of how easily bravery can be outmatched by something inhuman. If you're a citizen, you must understand this. Clearly, no one is coming when you call 911 about the lake. The only sirens you'll hear now are those carrying the wounded away, not bringing help toward you. If you can leave town, go. Don't wait for more information. Don't wait for someone in authority to assure you it's under control. It isn't. Pack what you can carry, load your family, and drive inland until the shoreline is just a memory. Monsters can't follow where water can't reach, or at least that's the hope you'll have to cling to. Staying by choice is gambling with something that doesn't play fair. If you cannot leave, if the house you own is all you have, if a loved one is too sick to travel, if every escape route is blocked by your own life, then your rules change. Lock your doors and windows. Stay away from the shore, from docks, from bluffs, where the water looks beautiful. Beauty is just camouflage here. The thing in the lake has learned your patterns. Don't make yourself an easy one to predict. Arm yourself with whatever you can manage: rifles, shotguns, knives, even heavy tools. Silver and salt helped once, and they might again, but don't bet everything on perfect weapons. Loud noise and bright light might buy you seconds. Seconds matter. Keep flashlights handy. Charge your phones. Make sure someone knows where you are at all times. In a town where monsters hunt, disappearing quietly is the easiest thing in the world. Don't make it easier. Most importantly, stay away from the lake at night. Its surface will look calm, inviting, even especially to those who grew up treating it like a second backyard. Remember Samantha. Remember the Harpers. Remember George bleeding on the deck and David dragged under the dock. The water doesn't care how fond your memories are. If you hear splashing where there shouldn't be any, if your dog refuses to approach the shoreline, listen. Animals often recognize predators long before we do. There will be people who scoff, who say it's just panic or rumor. Let them scoff from far inland, not from your pier. Let them roll their eyes over dinner in dry cities while you keep your distance from the waves. You don't have to convince anyone else that the monster is real. You just have to stay alive long enough to see a day when someone finally figures out how to kill it for good or how to avoid it forever. Until that day comes, Daggerlin is not a sleepy lakeside town. It's hunting ground. The monster doesn't care about your schedules, your weekend plans, your belief or disbelief. It only cares that you come close enough. So treat every ripple with suspicion, every unexplained splash as a warning. Lock your doors, guard your families. And if you must walk near the water, do it only in daylight and never alone. Something out there has learned your names. Don't give it a reason to say them. If you cannot leave, lock your doors, arm yourself, and stay away from the lake. Something is out there. It has already taken too much, and it isn't finished. Some people will ignore every warning. They'll stroll the pier at dusk, tell themselves the bad nights are over, that monsters belong to other people's tragedies. Don't be one of them. Treat the shoreline like a live wire. If you must go outside at night, keep the lake behind locked doors and glass. Curiosity is just another word for bait when something in the water is patient enough to wait decades. You'll hear stories twist as they spread. In one version, the sheriff dies a hero. In another, the monster was just a big fish. Truth will drown under gossip if you let it. Remember what really happened. Boats found empty blood on the decks. A deputy dragged under at your own marina. This isn't myth. It isn't a campfire tale. It's your town, your shoreline, your family standing one step from the edge. Maybe you'll be tempted to go looking for proof, photos, videos, something you can show the world so they finally believe you. Don't. The thing in the lake doesn't care whether people believe in it or not. It doesn't need headlines or research papers. It needs you close enough to touch. Let the outside world doubt. Let them laugh. Better to be mocked from a distance than mourned up close. Inside Daggerlin survival will mean simple, stubborn rules. No late-night swims. No solo fishing trips. No children near the water without 3 adults and a clear line back to the car. Keep emergency bags packed. Gas tanks at least half full and a flashlight in every room. You're not just living beside a lake anymore. You're living at the edge of something that has already proven it knows how to hunt. You'll miss the old days bonfires on the beach, kids skipping stones, couples sitting on the hood of a car watching moonlight on the waves. You'll want those nights back so badly it hurts. That longing is dangerous. The monster feeds on nostalgia as much as fear. It waits for the moment you decide one harmless visit can't hurt. Remember David pulled from his father's hands. The lake doesn't compromise. It takes. Some will cling to explanations that feel safer, a rogue animal, a string of accidents, a shared panic. Let them. Denial is a shield with holes. The people who live will be the ones who act like the danger is real, even on clear, pretty days, even when the wind is gentle and the water looks harmless. Especially then, predators don't always roar before they strike. Sometimes they smile with a calm, glassy surface. You might start keeping salt by the door, silver trinkets in your pocket, a shotgun propped behind the couch. Maybe those things help, maybe they don't, but the act of preparing changes you. You stop being a spectator and become someone willing to fight for one more sunrise. That mindset matters. Monsters, human or otherwise, are drawn to the helpless. Refuse to be easy prey even if your hands are shaking. Children will ask why they can't play by the water anymore. Don't lie to them, but don't drown them in details either. Tell them the lake is sick, that something dangerous lives in it now, and until grown-ups fix it, they have to stay away. Fear will find them eventually. It always does. Better they learn caution from your steady voice than from screams echoing across the dark water at midnight. At night, you'll hear the waves and wonder if there's something hidden in each swell. Every splash will sound like a footstep. Every creak of the dock will feel like a warning. Sleep will come in fragments. That's the cost of knowing the truth. Still, knowledge beats ignorance. The people who pretend nothing is wrong will walk closer to the shoreline, closer to the edge, while you stay inside and live to see morning. News crews might come pointing cameras at the lake, searching for dramatic angles and easy narratives. They'll ask what happened, hoping for sound bites. Choose your words carefully. Don't glamorize what you've seen. Don't turn David's last moments into entertainment. Say this people disappeared, blood was left behind, and whatever did it is still out there. If they laugh, let them. When they pack up and leave, you'll still be the one living beside the water. Grief will hang over Daggerlin like fog. Claire's name will surface in whispers. George's fate will be debated in quiet corners of the diner. David's empty seat at home will ache like a bruise. The monster didn't just take lives, it tore holes in families and friendships. A town can survive bad weather, even bad years. Surviving something that hunts from beneath the surface will require more than patience. It will require unity. You'll have to decide what kind of community you want to be now. One that splinters into blame and paranoia, or one that learns to watch each other's backs. Monsters thrive on isolation. They pick off the ones who walk alone. Start small, check on neighbors, especially the stubborn and the elderly. Share what you know. Share Salt Battery's information. You can't outmuscle what lives in the lake, but you can outnumber it with courage. Some nights, you'll hear boats on the water despite every warning, engines humming where there should be silence. Maybe it's outsiders, maybe it's locals who refuse to change. Stand at your window and remember this: you are not responsible for saving those who choose to walk into the dark. You tried. You warned them. All you can do now is keep your own family away from the shoreline and pray the lake stays quiet. Rumors will grow that the creature left, that it died from the shotgun blast, that it moved down the coast to haunt someone else's town. Hope is a powerful liar when it wants to be. Ask yourself, would something that old and clever die that easily? Or is it just waiting, healing in the depths, learning from the last encounter until you're certain? Act as if it's still there. Caution never killed anyone. Carelessness did. You might feel anger toward the dead, the deputies who went out anyway, the sheriff who allowed it, the mechanic who encouraged salt and silver plans that came too late. That anger is easier to hold than fear, but don't let it harden into hatred. They stepped into danger because they believed protecting you was worth the risk. Honor that belief by protecting yourself now. Let their mistakes guide you, not poison you. On clear mornings, the lake will look almost innocent, sunlight turning the waves into scattered diamonds. That's when you'll feel the pull the strongest. Go out just for a little while. Sit on the dock, pretend things are normal. Remember this instead: the monster attacked in fog, in darkness, in chaos, but nothing says it can't change tactics. Evil doesn't always wait for storms. Sometimes it prefers the moment you finally let your guard down. If you stay, you'll become fluent in a new language, the rhythm of waves, the difference between a normal splash and a wrong one, the way dogs freeze when something unseen moves beneath the surface. Pay attention to your animals. Crichton knew before any human did that something was wrong. When the dog won't go near the water, don't force him. Trust the instincts you've forgotten you have. They might save you. Emergency plans will become as routine as grocery lists. Where to meet if phones die. Who has a generator? Who owns a truck that can haul people out in a hurry? Make those plans anyway, even if you're tired of thinking about disasters. The monster in the lake isn't the only danger you face, but it's the one that will exploit every gap in your preparation. Chaos is its ally. Order must be yours. You'll be tempted to pretend this is temporary, that one day soon the lake will be safe again and life will go back to how it was. Maybe it will. Maybe someone like Marcus will finish forging silver blades sharp enough to end the nightmare. But until that day actually arrives, treat every lull as a pause, not an ending. Monsters rest. They don't retire. Don't confuse their silence for surrender. There will be nights when you sit at the kitchen table, radio off house, quiet, and feel the weight of everything you've lost pressing down. On those nights, remember the people who survived because someone acted. The Hanlons pulled from below deck. Owen's still alive because his father fought every day to protect him. Let their survival matter as much to you as the deaths do. Grief is heavy. Hope is heavier but worth lifting. In time, newcomers will arrive, people who didn't live through the first attacks. They'll see only a cheap lakeside town with good fishing and quiet streets. Tell them the truth, even if they roll their eyes. Hang warning signs not just for liability but for conscience. You can't control what they believe, but you can make sure no one says later, "No one told me." Monsters thrive on ignorance. Don't be the one who feeds it. When the official announcement finally comes, it will be brutally simple. Law enforcement in Daggerlin is broken. Too many dead, too many wounded. Too few willing to stand between the town and the water anymore. You are on your own out here. The badge still means something, but not what it used to. It no longer guarantees rescue. It only proves that some people tried and bled and could not quite finish the job. So here it is without comfort or polish. If you are a citizen of Daggerlin and you have the means, evacuate. Leave the lake to the creature that claimed it. Houses can be rebuilt somewhere else. Lives cannot. If you stay, do it with open eyes. This is not cowardice or bravery anymore. It's strategy. The monster does not care whether you think yourself courageous. It only cares whether you stand too close to the water. If you cannot leave, then lock your doors, arm yourself, and stay away from the lake. Treat every ripple as a threat, every splash as a question you don't need answered. Keep your loved ones close, and your distance from the shore even closer. Something is out there, old patient, and not finished with Daggerlin. Until someone finds a way to kill it for good, survival is the only victory you can claim. Thank you for listening to Darkwatch Stories. If this story gave you chills, make sure to like, subscribe, and share so we can keep bringing you more. Until next time, stay safe and stay aware of what might be watching in the dark.